He is clearly a fugitive murderer, but his actions while kidnapping the hostage are gentle, afraid even to harm a hair on the woman. The rope tied around her ankle is loose. It serves no purpose. Then, in the woman's puzzled gaze, the man calmly takes a piece of frozen meat from the fridge. With his skilled cooking technique, a delicious dish is soon presented. Before feeding it to the woman, the man carefully blows on the spoon, afraid of burning her mouth. Until night falls, the man unties the woman, preparing to leave. But outside, there are patrol cars everywhere, so he has to ask her to shelter him for one more night, promising to leave at a suitable time tomorrow. The next morning, the woman's son, Henry, sees a report of a fugitive murderer in the newspaper, and the photo is of the man standing before him. As Henry feels fear, his mother, for safety, actively comes over with a rope. But at that moment, the man shakes his head. But today arrives. We need to keep you in line. The man does this to protect the woman from being accused of harboring a criminal. To ease the tense atmosphere, the man offers the woman a taste of his homemade breakfast. Henry also suggests that his mother must try it. After the woman took a bite, he couldn't believe that a parent's bread could taste so good. At that moment, seeing this incredibly caring man stirred a ripple in Dale's heart after years of divorce. After breakfast, the man didn't waste any time, first fixing the leaking stone wall. Then he took Henry to maintain the vintage car. Then he carefully waxed the floor. And after that, he taught Henry how to grip a baseball. Watching the two of them pass the ball, Dale observed silently beside them. Henry seemed to feel an unprecedented fatherly love. Dale also began to warm up to him, thoughtfully picking up a needle and thread to fix his torn pants. At this moment, they seemed like a family of three, and there was finally a hint of a home atmosphere. But then, a sudden knock at the door shattered the tranquility. The man restrained Dale and let Henry go check on the situation. Fortunately, it was just the neighbor from across the street, who wanted to bring some leftover peaches to Dale. Before leaving, the neighbor also warned them about a murderer who had escaped from prison recently, and advised them to stay alert. After the neighbor left, the man finally felt relieved. To ease the tense atmosphere, the man shifted the focus to the peaches just brought in, noticing that the peaches were ripe, and would spoil if not eaten soon. At this moment, the man came up with an idea. They started by peeling the peaches. Then, under the man's guidance, they mixed the peaches evenly. Through the cooperation of the three, the peaches seemed unusually sweet. A sweetness filled the entire house. Then the man moved closer to Dale, teaching him how to mix the flour in peaches. Henry watched this. He knew the family really needed a father figure. Soon, a delicious peach pie came out fresh. While everyone was tasting it, the man hesitantly wrapped his arm around Dale's waist. Dale didn't reject this. Instead, he comfortably leaned his head on the man. After all these years, he seemed to have finally found a shoulder to lean on. But when night came, the man sensed it was the right moment. It was time for him to leave. At that moment, Dale spoke up to try to keep him, even if just to stay one more night. Seeing them unwilling to part, Henry could only act as a mediator and said, the man still had injuries. If he goes out now, the police dogs would surely smell the blood. Man. So I had no choice but to stay. That night, the man confided his background to Dale. His name was Frank. Because he was too handsome when young, he was forcefully seduced by a beautiful young woman. 6 months later, the woman gave birth to his child. Frank thought he had struck gold, so he married her right away. However, after marriage, the woman's true nature was revealed. She dressed up flashy every day, coming home late, while he stayed home taking care of the baby. One day, Frank couldn't hold back and followed her. He discovered she already had another man. He confronted her in anger, but instead of apologizing, she called him an idiot. In a fit of anger, Frank pushed her to the ground, but she hit her head and died on the spot. At that moment, a drop of water fell on her face, and Frank sensed something was wrong. He remembered the child in the bathtub, but when he rushed upstairs, the child's life had already been cruelly taken. As a result, Frank was sentenced to 15 years in prison. One day, he escaped from the hospital while undergoing an appendectomy, and fortunately encountered them. Dale felt deep sympathy for Frank's experience. At this moment, he had also accepted Frank deep down. Early the next morning, Frank seemed to have made this place his home. He fixed the loose boards on the stairs, and cleared the trash from the tobacco. At that time, Dell too changed into a beautiful dress, and served Frank tea. To help Henry become independent, Frank also taught him how to change attire in advance, and in return, Dell taught Frank to dance ballet. At this moment, they gazed into each other's eyes, with endless love flowing in their eyes. However, at that moment, the female neighbor suddenly barged in, saying she had to go out, and asked Dell to help take care of her son who had polio. Dell was about to refuse, but the woman left her son and walked away. The boy's arrival undoubtedly increased the risk for Frank, but seeing the disabled boy before him, kind-hearted Frank wanted to ensure the boy was treated well. Frank took the boy to the yard, and they played baseball together. The boy felt so happy for the first time. Afterward, Frank pushed the boy, allowing him to enjoy the long-lost sunshine. In the few hours they spent together, they appeared so at ease. Until evening, the female neighbor came to pick up the boy, but just then, the news on TV caught his attention. He realized that the reported killer was Frank at home. At this moment, the boy instantly forgot about today's joy. He tried to remind his mom, "The killer on TV is right here." Fortunately, the neighbor thought the boy was just being naughty, so she slapped him directly, and the boy had no choice but to behave. It was Frank. Thus, he successfully escaped a disaster. But clearly, this couldn't go on. So that night, Dale and Frank agreed. They planned to move to Canada where passports weren't needed, so they could happily live together. The next morning, they packed their bags and got ready to leave. But then Henry suddenly remembered something. He rushed on his bike to a location. He wanted to say a final goodbye to the girl he had a crush on, but the clever girl seemed to guess the reason immediately. It's in less than. Here on the run. Faced with the girl's questions, Henry's evasive gaze seemed to say it all. However, on his way back home, he was targeted by a patrolling police officer. He asked Henry where he was going, but Henry stammered and couldn't say a word. This raised the police's suspicions. He followed Henry all the way to the front of the house. Fortunately, the police only asked some simple questions. Frank, watching from above, also dodged a bullet again. Now the luggage is already packed. The only thing left is to withdraw the bank deposit. But Dale immediately wanted to exchange all the deposits for cash. The front desk thought Dale was scammed, so they had to report the situation to the supervisor. Although Dale insisted there was no problem. When faced with the supervisor's questions, Dale appeared particularly nervous, as if he had a blocked throat and couldn't speak. Fortunately, clever Henry resolved the crisis. Or seeing your bank can create space at the border. You asked me to help you open it. The manager and the receptionist were successfully amused. Dale took out the money as well. Everything is ready now. Just as they thought they could escape, they heard an ominous sound. For some reason, the police had discovered this place. They pinpointed Frank's location. At this moment, Frank knew he had no escape, so he tied Dale and Henry up again. This way, they wouldn't be punished for harboring a criminal. After doing this, Frank said goodbye to the two of them. You find it infuriating. Anyone else isn't worth your time. I'd spend 2 more years for just another 3 days with you. After a deep kiss, Frank resolutely walked out the door. He appeared deeply saddened at that moment. He wasn't upset about being caught, but because the happiness he longed for had vanished. Due to the escape, Frank was sentenced to 10 years. With the kidnapping charge, he received 15 years. Frank faced a total sentence of 25 years. Dale had tried multiple times to drop Frank's kidnapping charge, but the lawyer told him to lessen Frank's charges. Then Dale would be charged with complicity. At that time, he would also lose custody of Henry. In the end, the helpless Dale had to accept this reality. In the days that followed, Dale wanted to visit the prison many times, but was turned away for trivial reasons. Since he couldn't see Dale, he wrote to Frank instead. Sometimes he sent a letter every day, but never received a reply, and lost count of the envelopes returned. Dale actually understood that Frank just wanted to protect himself, not wanting to be associated with a murderer. 25 years passed in the blink of an eye. Henry opened a dessert shop thanks to the peaches back then. On this day, Henry suddenly received a letter, and the letter was from none other than the Frank whom Dale had been thinking of. He was no longer young, and he wondered if Dale was still single. If he hadn't married yet, he would be willing. You bring them happiness for the rest of your life. On the day he was released, Dale waited here early. A hazy figure gradually became clear, their faces probably lined with wrinkles, but that love still warmed their hearts. It was this love that made them wait a full 25 years. Sometimes, love is hard to define. When you encounter it, it could mean a lifetime of happiness. If you miss it, it might become a lifelong regret.